They cut off the human fleet's retreat. The humans smiled and said good. The alarm hit before I even finished my coffee. Not a soft warning tone, a full red alert, the kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain even understands why. I dropped the cup and it shattered on the deck of the Steadfast, and nobody around me even looked down at the mess. Ensign Grace Whitfield was already reading numbers off her screen in a voice that shook only a little. "Gate approach is blocked," she said. "Enemy fleet detected. 41 capital ships, closing the wormhole threshold behind us." For 1 second, the whole bridge went silent. Every officer understood exactly what that meant. We were 31 ships deep in enemy territory, and the only path home had just been sealed shut by an enemy force bigger than anything we had brought with us. I looked at Admiral Edward Coleman, expecting to see fear, or at least the tight jaw of a man calculating how many of us were about to die. Instead, he was smiling, a real smile, calm and almost amused, like someone who had just heard good news in the middle of bad weather. "Good," he said quietly. I turned to him. "Sir, did you say good?" "I did, Commander Bennett," he answered, still watching the tactical display. "Open a channel to the whole fleet, every ship, right now." I did not understand yet, but I followed the order, because that is what you do when the man in charge has that particular look on his face, the look of someone who has been waiting for this exact moment for a long time. The channel opened, and 200 confused human faces filled the display, captains and officers from every ship in our formation, all of them wearing the same look I probably had. Admiral Coleman spoke, and his voice was steady in a way that made the whole bridge lean forward without meaning to. "Listen carefully," he said. 3 weeks ago, back at the gate, our engineers spent 4 days installing a piece of equipment. We let it leak, quietly and badly, that it was a long-range communication relay, too delicate to risk in a fight. That was never true. It is a folding lattice. It bends space between 2 fixed points, and it only works when there is a large mass sitting directly between them. He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the meaning to land. "The gate is the first fixed point," he continued. "The Steadfast just became the second one, because the lattice went active 30 seconds ago. The enemy did not cut off our retreat. They walked 41 ships straight into the middle of a trap we built for them, because we spent 3 weeks convincing them that trap looked like a broken radio." I stared at the tactical plot. 41 hostile signatures sat packed together in a tight wall, exactly the kind of formation you use to block a narrow passage. They had no idea they were standing between 2 markers that were about to become very important. "They have no room to move," Coleman said, "and we have no reason to run. Weapons free the moment the lattice locks." "Whitfield, how much time until fold?" 90 seconds, sir," she answered, her fingers already moving across her console without waiting for further instruction. "Good," Coleman said again, softer this time, and I finally understood what that word meant coming from him. It was not confidence. It was relief. It was the particular calm of someone who had learned, across many years of hard lessons, that the most dangerous thing you can do to a group of humans is convince them there is nowhere left to run. We do not become careful when we are cornered. We become complete. There is no plan left to protect, no fuel to save for a long trip home, no reason to hold anything back. There is only the next 90 seconds, and everything you have to give to them. Coleman's voice went out to every ship in the fleet, and I like to think it carried a little further than that too, translated through whatever systems the enemy used, reaching some quiet command center that was still celebrating a perfect encirclement. "All hands," he said. "You are not trapped. You are anchored. Fold happens in 90 seconds. Bring every weapon online. We are going home the fast way." Nobody on the bridge cheered. That is not really how it works with us. Instead, there was a low sound, something between a held breath and a growl, the kind of sound a room makes when everyone in it decides the same thing at the same moment. Whitfield's hands never stopped moving. Across 200 channels, weapons officers were already counting down on their own boards without anyone telling them to. At 40 seconds, the enemy formation finally noticed something was wrong. 31 human ships were not scattering, were not searching for a gap in the wall around us. We were turning to face the thickest part of the enemy line, and every weapon system across the fleet was spinning up in perfect unison, aimed not at a hole in their formation, but directly into the center of it. 10 seconds, Whitfield said, her voice tight but steady. I found myself smiling too, without deciding to. It happens to almost everyone once you understand that the trap closing around you is actually closing around someone else. They cut off our retreat, I said, mostly to myself. Coleman heard me anyway. No, Commander, he said, watching the counter fall through 5, 4, 3. They cut off theirs. The lattice folded. Space folded like paper, and for one long moment, there was nothing but white light and silence, the kind of silence that feels heavier than any sound. Then the steadfast shook, hard enough to knock loose panels off the ceiling, and the tactical display flooded with new information all at once. We were home. Not just home, but home with company. On the other side of a wormhole that had, 90 seconds earlier, belonged entirely to the enemy, 31 human ships now sat surrounded by the broken remains of an enemy fleet that had followed us through without ever choosing to. Reports came in fast, overlapping, half of them shouted rather than spoken calmly. Enemy hulls scattered across our home system, some drifting without power, others firing wildly in every direction, trying to understand where they even were. Our defense grid, the one that guarded our home world day and night, was already responding, locking weapons onto targets that had appeared out of nowhere in the middle of their own patrol routes. I watched the plot fill with new markers, our own ships closing formation, enemy ships breaking apart under fire from every direction, home fleet reserves rising from orbital stations to join the fight. It was chaos, but it was our kind of chaos, the kind we had trained for 100 times in simulations that never felt quite this real. Admiral Coleman stood at the center of it all, calm as ever, giving orders in short, clear sentences, while the rest of us tried to keep up. Focus fire on the largest signatures first, he said. Do not let them regroup. Whitfield, get me a channel to Home Defense Command. Tell them what is coming through and how many. I moved to my station and began coordinating with the ships around us, matching targets, confirming friendly positions, making sure nobody on our side accidentally crossed into another ship's line of fire. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding in a way that felt almost pleasant, the strange excitement of watching a plan you never fully understood come together perfectly in front of you. Around me, the crew worked with a kind of focus I had never seen before. Not fear, not panic, just pure attention, everyone doing exactly what they had trained years to do. Lieutenant Owen Bailey called out shield readings without looking up from his board. Pilot Lucy Bennett kept the steadfast weaving between debris fields with movements so smooth they barely registered as motion at all. Every voice on the bridge blended into a single rhythm, fast, sharp, and completely certain. 10 minutes into the fight, the enemy commander finally understood what had happened to them. I do not know exactly how, but something in their formation changed, a shift from confusion to something closer to desperation. They began trying to retreat, searching for any gap that might lead them back toward open space. But there was nowhere left to go. They were surrounded now, not by a trap built from clever engineering, but by an entire home system fully prepared to defend itself. Coleman watched the shift with the same calm expression he had worn from the very beginning. Do not let them run, he said quietly. Close every path. This ends here. I relayed the order, and across the fleet, ships adjusted their formations, sealing off every direction the enemy might have used to escape. It felt strange, giving an order that would decide so much, but there was no hesitation in my voice when I spoke it, because I understood, finally, exactly what Coleman had understood from the very first second the alarm went off. We had never actually been the ones in danger. We had only looked that way. The fighting continued for another 20 minutes, sharp and fast, full of sudden turns and split-second decisions, but it never felt out of control. Every move our fleet made seemed to answer something the enemy had not expected, because we had spent 3 weeks preparing for exactly this moment, while they had spent 3 weeks preparing for something that never existed. When it was finally over, the silence on the bridge felt completely different from the silence at the very beginning. That first silence had been full of fear, tight and cold. This one was full of something closer to disbelief, the quiet of people who had just survived something enormous, and were only now allowing themselves to feel it. Whitfield read out the final numbers, in a voice that had lost its earlier shake. "Enemy fleet neutralized," she said. "All 31 of our ships still active. Minor damage across the formation. No major losses." Coleman closed his eyes for just a moment, the first sign of real tiredness I had seen from him all day. Then he opened them again, and the calm returned, as steady as ever. "Good," he said, for the third time, and this time everyone on the bridge understood exactly what he meant by it. Later that day, after the reports were filed and the ships had been checked for damage, I found myself standing at the observation window near the upper deck, looking out at the quiet space around our home world. Bailey joined me there, still wearing the faint mark of exhaustion around his eyes. "Did you know?" he asked. "About the lattice, before today?" I shook my head. Not a word. I do not think anyone below command level did. He was quiet for a moment, watching the stars. "That is a strange kind of trust," he said, following orders into what looked like a dead end, without knowing there was a plan underneath it. I thought about that for a while before answering. "I do not think it was really about trust in the plan," I said. "I think it was more about trust in each other. Even without knowing the details, everyone on this ship still did their job the same way they always do. That is what actually got us through it." Bailey nodded slowly, like the idea settled into place somewhere he had not expected. "Maybe that is the real trap they walked into," he said. "Not just the lattice. Us." I almost laughed at that, because it felt true in a way that was hard to explain. The enemy had studied our ships, our weapons, our formations, everything they could measure. What they never studied, because it cannot really be measured, was what happens inside a crew that refuses to treat being surrounded as the end of anything. Over the following days, the story spread through every ship in the fleet, passed around mess halls and maintenance bays, in dozens of slightly different versions, each one a little more dramatic than the last. By the time it reached the newer recruits who had not even been part of the mission, it had already become something close to legend, the kind of story told to explain what kind of people we actually were. I heard it told once by a young technician who had no idea I had been on the bridge that day. In her version, the enemy commander had realized the trap only seconds before the fold, and in that final moment, understood that every choice leading up to it had already been made for them. She told it with a kind of quiet awe, the way people tell stories about turning points, moments where everything before them suddenly makes sense. I did not correct her details. Some of them were wrong, small things exaggerated or simplified, but the heart of it was exactly right. We had been cornered, completely and deliberately, and instead of treating that as a disaster, we had treated it as an opportunity we had already prepared for. Admiral Coleman never spoke about it much afterward, at least not in front of most of the crew. I only heard him mention it once, weeks later, during a quiet moment in the command corridor when the two of us happened to be walking the same direction after a briefing. "People keep asking me if I was scared," he said, almost to himself. When the gate went dark, I glanced at him. I surprised he had brought it up at all. "Were you?" I asked. He considered the question longer than I expected. For about half a second, he admitted. Then I remembered what we had built, and who was standing beside me when it happened. After that, there was not much room left for being scared. I thought about that answer for a long time afterward, long after the mission had become just another entry in the fleet's history. It was not really about the lattice, or the clever engineering, or even the trap itself. It was about a simple idea that ran through every part of the plan, an idea that had nothing to do with technology at all. If you take away a group of people's ability to retreat, you do not weaken them. You force them to become exactly what they are capable of being, without anything held back to protect for later. The enemy had looked at our fleet and seen 31 ships trapped far from home, with no path back and no clear way to survive the encounter. What they had actually been looking at was 31 ships that had already decided, long before the gate closed, that retreat was never really part of the plan to begin with. Months later, I stood on the observation deck again, this time with a new group of young officers who had just joined the fleet, listening to yet another version of the story being told by someone who had not been there either. One of them, a young man named Peter Langley, turned to me near the end of it and asked if it was really true that we had smiled when the gate closed behind us. I thought about the moment, the real one, not the version that had grown into legend, I thought about Coleman's quiet good, and the low sound that moved through the bridge instead of a cheer, and the steady hands of a crew that had already decided how this was going to end before it even began. Yes, I told him. It is true. We smiled, because they thought they had taken something from us, and we knew they had actually given us exactly what we needed. He nodded slowly, the way people do when a story finally lands the way it is supposed to. Out beyond the window, the stars stayed still and quiet, the same as they always had, giving no hint at all of the storm that had once passed through them, or the fleet that had walked calmly into what looked like an ending, and found, instead, a beginning.